The sound of ice cracking. The day was like any other cold winter day. The lake had frozen over, and the town was making good use of it. My daughter Rachel was finally brave enough to try ice skating. The past couple of years had her breaking down into tears at the mere mention of it. My husband and I brought her dainty white ice skates with Anna and Elsa from Frozen on them. Rachel was ecstatic, always checking the weather every morning before school to see if it was cold enough for the lake to freeze. Well, it finally did. We packed a simple lunch and rode out to the lake. My husband helped her put on her ice skates and took her pink mitten-covered hands and guided her out onto the ice. I could hear laughing, my husband pulling her along as he taught her how to balance. I was 6 months pregnant and couldn't risk a fall, so I stayed on the shore. Bundled in a blanket, other families mingled nearby, skating to and fro across the white-coated lake. It was a beautiful, joyful sight, and I could hear the ice crack. There was a loud pop, and the sound of ice splitting. Now all I could see was Rachel standing alone, far out on the ice. I could see her looking down at something, her hands outstretched. I stood and I saw her standing on the edge of a black, icy hole. The hole my husband had disappeared into. I screamed for Rachel to stay still, that Mommy was coming for her. I took a few steps onto the ice. A few hands stopped me gently, and I could hear voices saying it was too dangerous. The ice was too thin. We had to wait for help. I could see the tears streaming down my daughter's face and see her legs shaking. She had her arms outstretched towards me and was screaming for me. The hands held me back, and all I could do was scream for Rachel to stay as still as she could, that we would save her soon. The sound of ice cracking caused my heart to jump into my throat, and I screamed at the sight of my daughter slipping under the ice, her screams silenced by the deadly black water. I fell to my knees, sobbing as the heartache overtook me. My tears fell onto the snow, melting it away. I caught a glimpse of movement under the ice in front of me and brushed away the snow. Floating under the surface of the ice was a woman. Black hair swirled around her face, and her beauty struck me. Her skin was an icy blue, and she wore no clothing. Her eyes were wide and solid yellow. They looked up at me, the gaze of them causing my panic to dissipate. The woman raised a webbed hand and placed it gently on the ice. The sound of cracking ice came from below. There was now a gaping black hole before me. A gloved pink mitten shot up out of the hole and grasped at the air. Screaming, I quickly grasped it and pulled my daughter from the icy water. She was alive. She was breathing. Her skin was a pale blue and her entire body shook violently. I comforted her, wrapping her in the blanket as I held her against my chest. My tears of sorrow now turned to relief at knowing my daughter was alive. I had her in my arms and she was safe. I could hear the sound of approaching sirens, but another sound caught my attention. Looking out onto the lake, I couldn't pinpoint exactly where it was coming from, but somewhere out in the distance, I could hear the sound of cracking ice.